welcome to Policy Pod. Today I have the distinct pleasure of having on my podcast Prerna Mukharya, the founder of Outline India. At Outline, Prerna works to create social impact through data and evaluation. She has a master's in economics from Boston University and a bachelor's degree in economics from the Prerna College. She has received many accolades, including the Distinguished Alumni Award from the Boston University recently, and has been part of the Fortune 40 Under 40 list as well. She is also a Chevening Fellow at Oxford and has been a technical advisor to the Aspen Institute. I, for one, am very excited about this podcast and to talk to you, Prerna, today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Ayush. Quite excited about what lies ahead.
Yeah. So, Prerna, let's start talking about your journey and that of Outline India. What has it been like for you and why do you do what you do?
I think the journey is now 11 years old, but I don't think you can ever refer to a journey as being old. It's a process of evolution, right? You change every day, you evolve, and the intention is to grow and to become better at what one is doing. I think I started out with a very simple idea, very everyday. There was nothing rocket science about it. So I started out in late 2012, and the intention really was that can we do a good job of collecting data for the development sector? And at that point, we were just coming out of this whole phase of, Indians are so good at analyzing. We were a couple of years away from the Infosys growth story and India being hailed as the BPO capital of the world, and then people moving on to say that Indians are so good with numbers, and at that point again, I feel like post-liberalization, 10 years hence, there was a bit of a pivot moment. Then we headed for the dot-com bubble, and then as we were coming out of it, India began to take deep pride in who she was becoming. And I think around that time, I felt like it was okay to take a chance on doing something that was so everyday and something so distinct at the same time. I call it so everyday because technically at the end of the day, it's data collection, it's doing surveys. And I call it so distinct because at that point, you did not really have dedicated organizations who were focusing on social research. So the same guy who was going out there and collecting data on toothpaste would be this guy who would go out there and collect data on your primary healthcare needs, or question why there were no roads in your village, or try and figure out whether your kids were learning at government schools. So these are two very distinct things, figuring out what color your toothpaste should be and which Bollywood star should be on the toothpaste box cover. And at the other end of the spectrum, figuring out why my 6-year-old doesn't want to go to school, or why there's no doctor in the public healthcare center, or figuring out why access to a certain government facility is so hard, etc. Right? So, I was a young 25, 26-year-old. Thankfully, I had no education loan. I must acknowledge the privilege I come from. Like I said, no education loan, and again, no pressure from parents. And if it's okay to say this in jest, I won't say the absence of expectations, but a freedom to do what I saw fitting, or what I thought was fitting. And I thought that after having worked at a premier think tank, and I had exposure to doing a lot of field work on the ground, I spent about 2 years trying to understand the quality of health and quality of education across rural India. And I think that job taught me so much. I traveled, and I was a city girl prior to that. And then I've said this in some of my other conversations, that you get out of Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Pune, and 80 kilometers or 40, 45 minutes outside the city, the reality really changes, Ayush. You walk into a classroom and girls sit on one side and boys sit on one side. Or you walk into a primary healthcare center and it might look like an abandoned facility with maybe 1 or 2 people hanging around. Or the counter to it is there might be 200 people waiting outside, waiting for their 100 seconds with a doctor who runs a private practice on the side, right? And not all is doom and gloom, but India is a big beast. It's challenging, it's exciting. And I think, and if I may add, to be able to work in the policy space in these years is such a blessing. If one is to choose a time period in India's history, I think now is the time. And I say now is the time simply because they're the winds of change. There's this intention to change. People want to change. We have, uh, the world's largest working populations. Our aspirations run super high, and our aspirations don't mirror the aspirations of our parents or the previous generations, right? And I think a lot of us, or at least I'm an 80s child, we grew up in an environment where saying the American dream was so commonplace. But I think now, and much like you see on TV or across social media, there's a deep sense of pride in coming back and contributing to the India growth story. And I think I just look at it from a social standpoint, right? That if working across cities or working in urban locations or running tech startups, you can make so much money or you can do so much good, or there's so much to be done just in general. Then if you look at the social spectrum, the number of have nots far exceed the number of haves in India. So what Outline India works on is for the superset of the Indian population. It's not the subset, it is the superset, right? And our goal as an organization or as an institution or as a data driven organization is to be able to tell our partners what is working on the ground, what social policy may work, or which government program has the highest likelihood of surviving the test of time, or what kind of an intervention, social product, service will be most beneficial to people, right? And again, I think it is worthy of commenting that anytime you step out and try and do good in the Indian context, you must be very cognizant of the negative externalities you might so be creating. And I think it's a challenge, but it also creates a very interesting phenomena, right? We do evaluations, which basically, in essence, means that we're like your impact auditors. So if you've run a social program, you've run a social intervention, you've handed out goods, or you provided a certain service, whether it's a health camp, or you just informed people about a new intervention or a new innovation that could help farmers, or maybe a tech solution that could help young mothers, etc. You also want to measure how well it's working, not working, what your target audience looks like. You also want to figure out what's the best way to take it to the right audience, whether you've missed out on a certain audience. And I think to be able to answer these questions, you need on ground data. You need to go out there, physically meet people, have a conversation with them, understand their needs from their point of view. And I think that's what Outline India's become good at.
Yeah, lovely. And when I reflect on whatever you just talked about, and especially the importance of data for social impact, I was just thinking to myself what was happening, let's say pre 2000s. It usually would be back in the 80s and 90s, some university professor who will want to do some research may have got some funds, but would have to start from scratch, build
Right.
a research team, gather researchers, gather surveyors, while all of these companies, especially the post liberalization era, all of these companies did have proper survey tools and proper survey research teams and everything available. You mentioned Colgate. They had started setting up those research teams. And I think for social impact, which in some ways has even more like bigger data, and importance of data is paramount in social impact or corporate life. I think the era in a way has started with places like Outline or JPAL or everyone else who has been using data for social impact. Another question that comes to my mind when you talk about data for social impact is, to someone who's listening and maybe working at the other side, has done a engineering degree and is working in the corporate on data, if that person was to consider moving to this space, what do you think are the similarities and differences when it comes to using data for social impact?
I think Ayush, I think the vantage point is very different. I think running numbers, there might be some amount of overlap in terms of the skill set, in terms of analyzing the data, looking at the delta, what it was 2 years ago and what it looks like now. So the delta is delta, whether it's for the corporate space or the social space, right? But the vantage point that you're looking at, in our case, it is super crucial to understand why something went up, what were the other factors to consider, what did policy look like at that point, what did weather look like at that point, what are the social factors influencing a certain social intervention, right? For example, present day, anything that happened during the pandemic from 20 to 22, there's this giant error variable. In fact, I won't even call it an error variable because it supersedes all other things, is the pandemic, right? When everything stood disrupted. In a similar capacity, whenever you look at the rollout of a social plan or a service or a product, in the social context or in the development sector context, it is very important to understand the local language, culture, people. How farmers in Madhya Pradesh will react to certain something is very different from how somebody living in the coastal areas in Odisha will react to, right? A stable government or a changing political scenario, just like it affects your stock markets, it affects how people behave, it affects their saving habits, it affects their spending habits. And then you have the external variables that are quote unquote outside of your control, such as weather, right? And there's this whole chatter about climate change and impact on so many things. And for the longest time, Ayush, I thought, oh, in India, everybody's talking about climate change because the West is funding it, and is it an eyewash, etc., etc. But I've seen data real time, and this is based on some of our own internal research as well, about how changing climate or weather patterns is affecting migration from coastal areas. It's sending people into urban locations few months in a year looking for jobs. It also means that there is heightened urbanization in a couple of months. It also means that there's a change in earning capacity among certain farmer groups in certain states. If there's sudden rainfall in and around Delhi NCR, a lot of us get very happy, but then there's a lot of farmers in Haryana who are displeased or who've lost their yield overnight. I think it is important to be cognizant of variables such as this. And I think, again, this is something that I want to mention. It's not just true of the development sector. I think specialization has taken over, just like you have a Blinkit or a Zomato that's just keen on delivering food or delivering everyday household items. A Blinkit or a Zomato isn't manufacturing, it doesn't have a factory or doesn't own a restaurant. They're capital light. Just like you have an Uber, it doesn't own the cars. It's simply connecting drivers who own assets. In a similar fashion, present day, you need specialists. Outline India is a specialist in M&E, in data collection. And just like that, you will have a lot of other think tanks in the policy space, somebody who's a specialist in foundational literacy, somebody else who's doing a great job in public health, somebody who's doing a great job in capacity building, somebody who's doing a great job in just running fellowships for young professionals who want to work in the policy space, right? So I think this is an era of specialization. It's also a very fastly evolving time to be working in the policy space. And just to circle back to your question, if I'm somebody who's working in the corporate space and I want to move to the policy space, I'll say, sure, give it a good shot. Just be willing for a very steep learning curve. Obviously, being good at Excel, being good at running numbers, or just having a sound understanding of what you're analyzing is crucial. And of course, some of those skills can be extrapolated to the development sector. For the longest time at Outline India, we've been using state. Some people use SPSS, others use R. But I'm seeing a growing interest among young professionals in terms of using Python. And I think I understand why that's happening, right? Data is a very expensive software. You punch queries into Chat GPT, the answers you get aren't as good. But you can get GPT to generate fairly good code for Python, for example, right? And I think all these changes, growth in technology, and typically, and forgive me for saying this, but the development sector is slow to adopt and adapt. Be it technology, be it change in methodology, be it in terms of not looking at other work that's been done in the sector by someone else. So all of us operate in silos. I think this is one of the banes of the development sector, that we don't like to share our failures, when in fact our failures can be more useful to our partners and competitors and other players than our successes. Because you definitely don't want another player to trying out what you've already tried, simply because you're working in the social space. Money and time and resource is scarce. Money, time and resource is crucial. You might have a lot of funders running towards startups in organizations or in startups that are for-profit driven. But in the dev sector, in the social sector, the motivations are very different. So the vantage point is very different. And I think there's another side comment here that I don't, so the motivations are different, but I think it's unfair to expect somebody working in the development sector to not earn or not earn a fair wage.
Yeah.
For the longest time, Ayush, whether it's the clients or the partners, uh, dev sector salaries are still not commensurate, and perhaps they never will be commensurate in terms of other startups or other organizations. I'm okay with that. But I think just the expectation, which is already changing, must continue to change, right?
Yeah.
Incentives are important, right? And if you want, you throw peanuts, you get monkeys. You want incentives, you want good ecosystems, you want to draw good talent. Loosening of purse strings is important, and this is something that I have learned the hard way as well. This is not to say that I knew this 10 years ago, but like I say, the development sector is a very interesting beast.
Yeah, that's a lot of food for thought. But before I dive deeper into how do you do what you do, would love for you to share some stats with us, or if I may call them achievements of what Outline India has been able to do in its 12-year journey.
Okay, so I think we've worked across, I don't know how many thousand villages by now, Ayush. I think
Yeah.
maybe 70, 80,000. We stopped keeping count about 2 years ago, and now my colleagues do some of this, but we've stopped keeping count. And of course, a big body of our work is across the states with the relatively bad indicators. So UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, MP, Rajasthan, Delhi. These states, I think we're always working in these states. And we've done over some 350, 400 evaluations. And many of these evaluations were multi-year, multi-round. So might have touched about 1,000 assessments by now. We haven't really gone about calculating it. Because again, our work requires that they speak the local dialect, they're familiar with the culture. And again, when we do on-ground or field deployments, these can run for 3 months, 3.5 months.
Yeah.
You're literally going from village to village, you're literally traveling every single day. And India is such key, when it's hot, it's just too hot. When it's cold, fog sets in and then you can't see things on the road, and then how do you send your women out? When it's rainy, your roads collapse, so then there's no public transport movement. When there's something happening with governance or something political happens, then again you can't send your people out because you're in the business of surveys, so then that can be misinterpreted.
Yeah.
If some bad news comes out, or if there are parties raging against each other and you go ask some questions on governance, people assume that you're from the opposition. If somebody, and if you're working in a certain district or block and somebody gets transferred, your permissions get rescinded and again your work stalls. So my point is, and I say this to all my friends, right, that I think our business is such that it is affected by quote unquote the vagaries of nature so much more than any other business I know, that I think no one day at Outline India resembles the previous or can resemble the next. I never know when my phone will ring and what the news will look like. It has been 11 years, but I continue to be surprised. I'd love to be bored by a field deployment, but that doesn't happen. And again, these are people you're interacting with, so it's not a machine I'm dealing with. It's not a message window on Microsoft or on Google Meet or Hangout, right?
How do you go about recruiting these people? Because it's project to project basis. I'm assuming if you have a project today in Odisha and let's say you've not done a project in Odisha before, you need, as you said, and dialect changes from one region to another, in fact, in a state. So how do you?
Oh, it's so hard. But I think the interesting thing is that a majority of our work is rural, remote parts of the country, and we're increasingly doing more in urban tier 2, tier 3 places. So urban tier 2, tier 3 is your social enterprises, some of your impact funds, some of your more tech-driven organizations, but all not-for-profits, think tanks, government-driven work, CSR-driven work. Most of that is rural, remote parts of the country. And I think the good thing about these areas is people have time, right? I won't make a sweeping statement because, for example, if you're going to survey a farming community, so people leave for the field right in the morning.
Yeah.
They will go at 5, 5:30, 6, right? And then they'll come back in the afternoon to have lunch, and that's the time you got to catch them. Secondly, let's say if you're doing interviews which require a conversation around banking needs or financial literacy, then it's usually the male member who will be well informed. So now if you go during the day, the man's gone out to work. So then you've got to time your interviewing accordingly, right? Again, if you're interviewing just women, you want to make sure you meet the woman when her mother-in-law is not around.
Yeah.
Because if the mother-in-law is around, the woman will not get to really share her opinion or answer the questions truthfully. And again, if you're interviewing women, you can't go interview them after a certain 4 or 5 p.m., right? Because if it's dark, then you can't meet them, or you can't send your female staff out, right? It's not easy, but the good news is, like I said, that when you go into rural, remote parts of the country, when you go in as Outline India, or when you tell them that you're representatives of a certain organization, people are very happy to see us in 9 out of 10 cases or 8 out of 10 cases, because they feel or they believe that this surveyor or this organization will take my voice or will take my opinions and go tell those people out there that, listen, I need this, or listen, my hand pump is not working, or the PDS shop is not receiving ration on a timely basis, or that the electricity is an issue, or my kids aren't learning at school, or my girl child isn't able to head to school because it's dark, or that alley isn't safe, etc. So our work is very real, very hardcore, and I think that's what makes it exciting, and that it's also probably why people are willing to share their deepest, darkest needs, thoughts, beliefs. And some of these are also very politically incorrect. Some of these are also, I don't know how to say this, but you'd be surprised about the kind of things we hear in the field. And I think that is why it requires so much effort in terms of just training our field staff to not be judgmental.
Yeah.
On one particular day, we might be doing a study on domestic violence. So there might be a man who's telling us why he thinks it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Or we spoke to another woman in the field once who told us that she forgot to add salt to the food and her husband hit her, but she thought it was the right thing to do because it was a mistake. Now, it might come as a shock to some of our listeners, but that woman has been groomed and brought up in an environment or an ecosystem where her beliefs are set up as such. And I think our job as a third party assessor or as a monitoring and evaluation organization is to just take this information to the right players or compile and collate it without judgment, and hopefully change will be on its way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And I think it makes me happy when I hear someone who, at the start of our podcast, was talking about a fairly urban upbringing, talk about all of these stories and journeys. And I think that's another part of working in the social sector, right? All of these journeys, stories, and that's what's. I feel today we are talking about compensation being not commensurate. It was much, much lower.
Correct.
10 or 15 years
Absolutely.
earlier. And people still chose to do this for these journeys and these stories and the kind of work they got to do. And I think for all of us, it has enriched us to a great extent. I think when we talk about data, I think there's a lot of dissatisfaction of sorts about the amount of publicly available data in the recent years, the NSSO data or other sort of data sets public available, the surveys done by Government of India, because anyway, a lot of researchers don't have the resources to do it. I think it's a very expensive sort of like mechanism to be able to collect data for your research. So most people would go for secondary research. Hence, what's your opinion on this?
So 2 points, Ayush. I think you just commented that people come to the development sector because of the enriching experience. I think that's obviously one of the bigger ones. I think people also, a lot of young professionals also come because they feel that they'd be able to write solid SOPs and go study abroad. That also happens. And again, no judgment, right? If getting on-ground experience helps you get into a good school and you get to understand India better, why not, right? And I think still others come to us because they feel that they want to start a policy outfit of their own. So they come, they want to understand how things operate, understand the nuts and bolts of the ecosystem and then go back. And then I think I see a surge right now in terms of a lot of professionals who've graduated from Tata Institute going and working in political consultancies. I think that's emerging as an outfit which is where students go in or young professionals go in, they work day and night for 8-10 months, they are exhausted, then they move out. So they've learned some tricks of the trade, but then they want to move on to the dev sector where their skills are fairly usable. So that's also a subset of people who come to us. And then of course, the academics who don't want to teach, who don't want to be writing research papers day and night, they also come to us. And I think that's interesting because working with us is as close as you get to real time research, but at the end of it, we're also in the business of research. So that's a very good balance between working in policy and being able to make money. To come back to your question on the status of publicly available data, I think in the last 5 years, I have actually seen a lot of consolidation and collation of data happening with government data sets, Ayush, and I think that's wonderful news. For example, take the instance of data sets, Ministry of Women and Child Welfare. So you'll have data sets that are available at the center, and then if you go down to at the state level, for example, Madhya Pradesh will have its own website at the state level, which will have its own data set. And then if you go down further, it's possible that a district and the block will also have their own data sets. And of course, these data sets within the state, between the district and the state level, these data sets may or may not be speaking to one another. But I think the silver lining here is that in the last 5-7 years, or in the last 2 terms of the government, there has been a massive effort in terms of just consolidating data sets and regularly updating these data sets.
Yeah.
So the quantum of data available to anybody looking for these data sets, you could be a professional, a researcher, a corporate, or just a big data company, etc. The quantum of data available publicly has definitely shot up. It's also exciting to see that this data is digitized. Unlike when I was researching in 2010 or 2012, a lot of these were scans and then a page would go missing, and these were paper scans, crooked or not easily visible, and then you had to take a print, or you had to have some poor researcher copy and fill out an Excel sheet day after day. So those practices have completely stopped. And so there's a step forward, right? I think there's also been really good efforts at building data sets that India simply did not have. For example, LASI. So India's effort to build its data set on elderly people. For the longest time, India's had no information on the elderly population, their healthcare, their living conditions. But last couple of years, that data set has evolved. That's looking really good. And yes, you're right that these data sets are expensive to curate. And you can never look at these data sets at face value, because if you sit down and, much like the jokes they crack about economists, that if you're looking to prove something, you can just go back to the data and prove it, which in essence means that if you want to prove your hypothesis, you'll always be able to do that. That's not what you should be doing, right? You should look at the data more objectively, and once you've collected the data, that raw data has to go through a process of intensive cleaning and processing and trying to fill in the gaps and just trying to understand why that data looks like it does. Which is why, as a researcher, or even personally, and I think at Outline India, majority of our studies are mixed method, which means that with quantitative data, you're looking at qualitative information. So you're looking at the stories behind the numbers. It's not just, oh, I'm not sending my girls to the school, but I'm sending my boys to the school. That might imply that there's gender disparity. But then if you go deeper, why aren't you sending your girls to the school? Oh, because there is no secondary school in the neighborhood in a 5-kilometer radius. Because a lot of people historically did not send their girls to school after the age of 14. But of course, things are changing. Or the road to the school is treacherous, or you have to wade through some water and get to the school, and that's why I can't send my girl child through it, or my girl child is scared to get through it. So I think, again, in the context of the development sector, you go in with a certain assumptions and you'd be surprised and shocked about the real reasons behind why people are behaving the way that they are. And I think that's what makes this space so exciting, and there's so much to learn.
That's such a valid point, and I, for one, have always been a huge champion of mixed method studies. And I think another thing, what you were saying about the availability of data, it's also how, like, you were talking about the scans. It's so, like, communication has gotten so much better with data that it's not just the researchers and professionals, but even common public, with all the portals and dashboards which are available publicly. A lot of data is available for the civil society or public, or maybe someone sitting in Gurgaon ka residential colony taking decisions about their own colony and being just informed. I think that's actually really a step in the right direction. And with technology improving, I think it'll only improve.
In fact, Ayush, I think there's a lot of projects that people out there now don't know about. I'll just take two examples. Now, for example, this was contracted to one of the big four. All the Rajya Sabha proceedings that happen on that channel that nobody watches typically, they are all that information and all that data and everything that is said by different representatives of the government. All of that is now compiled, collated, and is available as a project on a certain website. I don't know if, I'm pretty sure that's up and live yet, but that's one thing that's happened. And I think about 2, 3, 4 months ago, I was meeting somebody at the Education Ministry, and they were telling me about this really nice project that, for example, now I'm a 5-year-old and I obviously have an Aadhaar, because you can get an Aadhaar as a newborn as well, and then obviously you get it updated, etc., etc. But let's say now I move from Madhya Pradesh to Chhattisgarh, and I was enrolled in a certain public school, and I moved mid-year because my father got a job, or we had to move for family or for some other reason. And what happens to my scores? Or I could be a 12-year-old, or I could be a 16-year-old. What happens to my scores, right? What the government's really done is created a unique ID, and these are under 18 minors. So they've created a unique ID for every pupil, and that unique ID will carry all your mark sheets and the tests you've taken and how you scored, irrespective of which village I move to now, or God forbid there's a flood and I lose the physical mark sheets. That loss to learning, or that those precious months, or I won't have to repeat a class simply because I can't prove that I cleared a certain test. And I think so all this wonderful work is being done, and of course hard technology is at the back end of all of this. I think we don't discuss some of these government projects enough, but I think there is significant value add to DigiLocker or some of, and a lot of real life applications to a lot of this. And again, I'm at a personal level, I think the role of state is limited. At a personal level, I don't think the state needs to do everything, but India is an ocean, right? And there's always a J curve involved when you're looking to affect change or create change. So when you go out there and you want to make some things better, it is possible that in the initial years, the graph will first drop and then begin to rise, right? I think anytime you look at data, make sure you're looking at it with context. Make sure you're looking at it with a backstory. Make sure you are fully cognizant of the conditions under which that information was captured. Never look at data just at its face value.
Yeah, fair, that's fair. And when you talk about the mark sheet and the DigiLocker, I just get flashbacks of a typical Hindi movie from 90s where Govinda is traveled to Bombay,
yes,
carrying the
mark sheets,
chhati se, and subah uthaya,
it happened to all of us, right? I remember my sister when she was joining Delhi University, she accidentally forgot her folder in the auto, and then coincidentally a friend of hers took the auto right after. Otherwise it would have been hell, right? And we live in a different time now, and that's amazing.
I think it's very exciting, and I think I could talk to you for hours about data, and I have so many questions still bubbling in my head, but I would now like to take a detour and talk a little bit about your personal journey. So let's go back to 2012. What's happening in your head? You have done your masters. You have a wonderful experience and exposure in terms of working as a RA at Harvard and MIT. You have experience working at the Center for Policy Research, the premier think tank in those days in public policy. What's going on in your head? What makes you...
I think it's amazing to be young and foolish, number one, right? So there is no spotlight moment. I think there was nobody telling me to go out there and set up a company. Social media was not as rife back in the day, so it wasn't that I was reading about startups. And back in the days, certainly startups or a young person starting a policy outfit in 2012 was unheard of. I also did not have a PhD, so people did not take me seriously. People also thought that because I spoke in English, I was a media journalist or something like that. So anytime I walked into a conference, everybody always directed me to go sit with the journalist. I'm also a single female founder, so I think that came as a bit of a surprise. But I think 2012 was very simple. I had just finished my project at CPR, and I thought that, much like the story I told you a little earlier, that I thought that there were no organizations doing Mondragon evaluation. We certainly didn't have organizations focusing on social sector data. And I thought, what if we could look at data at step zero? And my thesis has always been, Ayush, that if you're analyzing data that's problematic, then you're making recommendations that are problematic, and then your policy moves are problematic. So attack data or take care of the problem at its very roots, which is the point at which that data is collected. If it's collected in a way that's standardized, that's efficient, that's scientific, wherein the people collecting it have the right motivations and incentives, and it's corporatized in a certain way in the sense that it's systematized, right? I think you can do wonders. That data is more representative, it's more robust, and it's more believable. And I thought that I was young, I had a lot of energy. I thought I could probably do a good job of it, and hence happened Outline India.
Lovely. And I think you have, I think I would like to pick up the part about being a single founder. And most people I usually speak with, they end up starting it with someone because it's so much easier. You have someone to fall back on, you have someone to discuss things with. Have you ever felt the need for that?
See, I think in hindsight, it's always easy to say that I should have definitely gotten another founder. And I think the math equation is very simple, right? One brain, let's say, leads to an outcome of X. Two brains can lead to an outcome of X cube or an exponential X, right? And no, I did not know better. Yes, I should have gotten another founder. Maybe we would have been able to do more work and better work and etc. Should have, could have, would have is a rabbit hole that's no point going down. But yes, I'm in the process now of building out to senior leadership at Outline. We've just had a partner joining us. We're going to have another partner joining us within this month. And I have some plans of scaling Outline in the interest of taking it to its rightful place. So even though it's year 11, year 12, there is much to be done. But certainly, I think I've learned a lot. And I wouldn't have had my life panning out any other way. Very lucky in terms of some of the decisions I've made and some of the things that did not work out, which led me to continuing or not giving up on this piece. Yeah, very fortunate.
Kudos to you. Kudos to you. And I think another concern usually founders have is around just, you mentioned people weren't taking you seriously because you didn't have a PhD, which was the norm and all of that. But yeah, just generally also, it's always good to, one, learning is happening within the job, but
Right.
you do need some external
Absolutely.
learning opportunities as well. How did you manage that? What have been your avenues of learning outside Outline over the years?
One thing is, I think in the last year, maybe I've started reading a lot. I'm always listening to a podcast or reading a book, and I think I'm in company of people who read a lot. So they've in turn made sure I'm reading a lot. But no, I think in the last 10 years, every time I could, I would apply for fellowships. So I've done a bunch of these. I've done one that's meant for senior CSR leaders and development sector professionals. I did the Chevening at Oxford. I did the ORF Raisina Fellowship, which was right here in Delhi. And again, I think the goal of doing these fellowships is meeting the right mix of people, stepping, because like they say in Hindi, koop mandoop or worldview,
Yeah.
right? And I think I'm a victim of that on a lot of different days and a lot of different occasions, which is why once you step out and you see this big world out there where people are doing such amazing, wonderful things, changing the world one tiny step at a time, you realize that maybe your contributions can be improved, or the way you're rolling out can improve, or that there are partnerships to be done that you've not thought about. So stepping out of your comfort zone, being answerable to outsiders, having mentors or advisors, is, you should have those pieces, and that's not a debate.
Yeah. Right? And but every time you step out of Kupmandu, for example, the Chevening 10-week fellowship you did back in 2018, how do you keep the phone calls and
Oh, it was
meetings and
horrible. But
everything?
I think I'm still in disbelief that I managed to do it. But I'm very grateful to my colleagues here who pulled things for 2.5 months without me, because I was in a different time zone. So very grateful to my colleagues, especially Sukanya, who just handled a lot of things. But at my end, I think I didn't sleep too much. those 2.5 months, because we had a lot of classes, we had projects, and I also wanted to drive around the countryside. So I think I drove some 3,000 miles in 2.5 months. Every weekend I was
Wow.
out. So I drove a lot around England and Ireland and Scotland, and had some wonderful conversations, met some wonderful people, and of course I had a chance to be at Oxford for a little bit, which is a source of joy. So yes, I think we're all a function of summation of experiences we have, and yes, I think lucky in that aspect.
Hopefully, you keep getting such opportunities. But I think something which may have been a part of you being able to pull it through, and something I found very intriguing while doing your research, is your habit trackers and the discipline that you bring to everything you do. Let's talk a little bit about that, just the role of discipline in a founder's life, because especially when I visualize you starting something in 2012 and you're managing admin, you're managing just very specific and at the same time maybe vague policies that you have to do to set this up, and you're getting irritated ki, oh, my 80% of my time is just going in a
Oh,
lot
that
of
is so
admin
true,
stuff.
and I usually, I'm not,
Yeah.
and I'm not proud of it, but I think every founder must find a way to give, do lesser and lesser of these admin things, and preserving of bandwidth and preserving of space. It is so important, and I think I didn't realize it soon enough, but that's why I started wearing this Aura ring earlier this year. A dear friend asked me to, and it tracks my stress. That's the only reason I wear it. But other than that, yes, I maintain to-do lists. I maintain several to-do lists. I also maintain very intense habit trackers. I have a sense of every workout I've done in the last 6 years. Every single time I've entered the gym, I know what day it was and how intensive that was. In fact, last year I also added a couple of fields to my habit trackers, which included, oh, did I read today? Oh, was I kind today? Oh, did I lose my temper today? And then, of course, in this year, in 2024, I've added even more fields to it. Did I meditate today? Did I have fun at work today? What's the special something I did at work today? And did I try something new at work today, etc.? I think growth happens in spurts, and it's always incremental, and you'll never see the incremental steps. But I think it's important to keep moving forward. I'm also, like I said, I think fitness is important. If you're living in your body, you better be able to take care of it. So I don't eat outside too much. I don't like ordering in.
Yeah.
I like, or I've become very conscious about the food I put into my body. Of course, I have cheat days, and of course, I have weaknesses, but I don't take sugar, for example. I don't like meatha, etc., etc. And I think, again, it's important to stay sane, because it's not about how many days you'll have that are peaceful. It's about just tackling. Things will go wrong. Things will go wrong on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. You just have to find a calmer way of dealing with them. And I think, and of course, it's about how you can control your emotion on a day when the house is on fire and when everybody is going helter skelter. I think I also lose my cool, but I have realized that on that day when the house is on fire, when everyone else is helter skelter, on that day I have always found myself to be cool. When everything is going up in flames. Of course, on other days when there are other small issues or slightly bigger issues, I might also lose my cool on certain days. But I think all these incremental steps, I want to believe help. I think it's also an age thing, Ayush. I think you become more comfortable in your skin as you grow older. You also realize that you have a lesser need of pleasing outsiders. You also realize that you don't want to be on social media as much. And of course, you have to do some of that because it's a business and you've got to sell. And sometimes founders are brands for their own companies. And I think all of that is great. But I think there comes this comfort with age. And you really start thinking about, in this life, what does really matter to me? And I think you just have to start saying no to a lot of things. It is so important to say no. You cannot say no. You cannot say yes to everybody. You have to say a lot of no's to be able to accommodate things you want, or to be able to make time for things you should be doing.
Wow, that's inspiring. More power to you. And I think something I would like to ask, that is one for us noobs. What does these habit trackers look like? How do you
It can
really?
be simple, very simple. Just take up an Excel sheet on the left hand side, put down the 5 things or the 10 things or the 6 things you care about. Let's say you want to wake up early, and I don't wake up early, but let's say you want to wake up early. That can be one thing. Let's say you want to not eat sweets every day, so that can be number two. Number three can be, did I reach office on time, for example? And then on the top row can be the days or the dates. That's about it. It's that simple. It is simply that simple, right? That's what a tracker looks like.
Crazy. And we talked about the journey and the days when things are going helter skelter. What's maybe your coping mechanism, or what's your support systems in life?
I think first first time the house on fire, you're like, ah, second time, ah, third time you might scream even louder. But by the time it's the sixth time, or the 20th time, or the 30th time, or the 50th time, you just know better. And I think even when you're in the midst of hell, or when even in the midst of something that's going seriously wrong, you know in your heart that this too shall pass. Right? You just know it, right? During the pandemic, Ayush, we could not deploy field workers on the ground, right? And we could not give them data collection gigs and telephonic surveys. There were very few of those that you could do, right? So we had to bench some people, and then we didn't have work for our field staff, and they came to us and said, oh, how do we feed our families, etc. It was an incredibly tough time. So you find we had to give some money, and find we had a coping mechanism, etc., etc. But I feel that we did get through it, and I think most of us, or 90% of us, if we were to look back, we won't remember how hard a time it was. Of course, it was incredibly hard, but every single day, not being able to step out, not being able to meet people, we won't, in hindsight, things just look easier.
Yeah.
But I think now, any day when something is going wrong, I just know that this is not it. I know this is not the end, and I know that this is not how it will end. Whether I can fix it, or my colleague will fix it, or whether it will get fixed is still a question mark. I don't know the answers, but I definitely know that just because the chips are down, it doesn't mean we're done.
Wow. And I think some of those times, the most challenging and difficult times, are the ones which you look back with pride, and sometimes there's so much learning coming out of them anyway. So yeah, while I'm enjoying this segment, I think I would have to segue into another segment, where we are going to talk about your perspectives on the social sector and journeys in the social sector. I think something which sometimes personally concerns me. So I was giving a lecture at IIT Guwahati last week, and I was just very surprised. This was masters in liberal arts and development studies students. I was very surprised the kind of enthusiasm they have for public policy careers, and at the same time sometimes less exposure or whatever because of how academia functions and everything. Sometimes I get concerned that they're only able to see the next 5 years maximum when they're graduating. And it's given, while social sector opportunities and jobs have really improved in the last 10, 15, 20 years, it's still very chaotic, it's still very unstructured. How do you see this space growing? If someone who's just starting out in this space, or has spent 3, 4 years in this space, and you were to give advice to that person, what would you say?
So you're asking me how I see the policy space, or just the teaching in the policy space?
No, the social impact space, careers and social impact.
I actually see, I think there's a lot of excitement. Like I say, I think incentive structures in the development sector will be strengthened. I think the importance we accord to the policy sector will quadruple or will grow exponentially. I think for the longest time, everybody said doctor, lawyer. Then people started saying, oh, engineer. Then everybody said coder.
There was a pilot phase also.
All of that. And I think now, of course, we see many more public policy schools. I think you and I are from the policy space, so we love it. But I think people on the outside, they still don't accord the policy sector the respect it truly deserves. I think when you work in policy, when you work in public policy, when you work in the dev sector, you're building something. And again, let's not go into the motivations of building it, etc., etc. But I think you're working for the public good. And again, I'm going to go ahead and say that working for the public good doesn't mean that I shouldn't be able to support my family or send my kids to a good school. I will stick to the fact that for profit structures are important, but I will also concede that you need your not for profits for certain reasons.
Yeah.
The change I see happening in the next couple of years is I see many more tech startups that are geared towards this superset. So I have my reservations about the ed tech space. And again, I will not make a sweeping statement, but I think a lot of these ed tech things just don't work. Yeah, you can't expect a tiny phone with a mother who can't read herself. You can't expect her to teach 3 kids using a tiny phone with a cracked screen. So I have my reservations. But for example, there are other examples of startups doing really well. For example, in the agri-tech space, right?
Yeah.
Farmers receiving phone calls or just getting weekly or daily updates on weather patterns or what they should be growing or what they should be growing, or just supply chain mechanisms improving. For example, I'm in some village and I receive an SMS saying, oh, the PDS shop has received its ration, so I can go visit. Or cashless transactions, right? That I'm receiving money directly on my phone. Or this whole giant thing that we're doing right now about financial inclusion for women. So if you think about it, when we discuss Paytms of the world, etc., leave out the urban tier 2, tier 3 places, the number of women you have using these softwares is still, it's a very disappointing number. And I think we're seeing a big effort in that spectrum. So I actually see tons of socially motivated yet incentive driven but very scalable startups evolving that are meant to cater to this superset of India. And because they will have their own incentive structures in place, I see a lot of good happening. For example, the financial inclusion example I took, why does it work? It works because now I'm a woman, and if I'm getting money directly on my phone, my husband can't take it from me. It's come directly to my bank account, or my mother-in-law can't take it from me. Why does it work for the government? Because now the number of women who are willing to work has gone up. So the state numbers look better. So the government is keen on something like that. Why does it work for the banking ecosystem? Because now there's more money in the bank vis-a-vis money in cash. Why does it work for the startup? More users, more players in the ecosystem. So I think when you can build on an idea where incentive structures and motivations are aligned, you have magic on your hands. And I think models such as this will have to be tracked. We'll have to figure how to scale them. We'll have to figure how to loop in more stakeholders into it. And I think, and again, I have varied views on how the state should function, but I think a lot of this excitement will permeate or will take over how we function in the policy space.
And while we are talking about careers and what the future looks like, we should talk about hiring and hiring at Outline. I see Outline putting very frequent, for all those listening, you may want to check out the LinkedIn page. But Outline is hiring quite frequently, and that's the testament to also how quickly Outline is growing. What has been your experience with hiring in social sector? And because you're at the other side, when you look at those CVs and resumes and interview people, what do you think people are usually missing?
I think if I can be very candid, I think there's been a shift in terms of thinking after the pandemic. A lot of people want to go freelance. That might work for project basis, that might work for short projects, but doesn't work for us. Freelancers, it has not worked out for us too much. So that's one. Two, and I don't want to call names, but a lot of young professionals now graduating, I'm not saying they don't want to work hard, but I feel like there's a certain degree of entitlement. And I think that in the social sector, much consultants putting in lots of hours is commonplace, or coders putting in lots of hours is commonplace. Doctors have to put in long hours, lawyers have to put in long hours. But I see a new set of young graduates who don't want to put in the effort that's needed to learn the tricks of the trade. And that's a negative, I think.
And a very distracted set of people also, with all the scrolling that comes.
So I'm of a different age group, so I don't know how youngsters feel about the scrolling piece, but yes, all of us have very short attention spans.
Yeah.
So I think for example, on weekends, So my phone is always on silent, much like all of us now put our
Yeah.
phones on always on
Yeah.
silent. And this is in stark comparison to 15 years ago when people were buying hello tunes or calling ringtones. Now nobody wants their phones to ring.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing is I also see a lot of youngsters jumping organizations. They feel they've learned everything about the sector in 6 months, which I find to be extremely shocking.
Yeah.
And that's something again that
Yeah.
I think is a negative. I think it is important that you go deep. I think it's important that you spend at least a year understanding the sector, the ecosystem, and of course, if you feel like you're done, then that's fine. But I think it's only after a year that you really begin to enjoy and you start owning it, and
Yeah.
then you can lead projects and then you can learn things. And I think that's where the magic lies. But if you're already moving out by 8 months and your notice is
Yeah.
a month and a half, 2 months, then you've just come in, dabbled around, and you're good to go. It might work in certain sectors, but that's not my thought process.
Fair enough.
Yes, but the flip side to it is that I would imagine that a lot of youngsters want to experiment, they want to work with different, good for them. But I think working hard and just using logic and being willing to listen, super important.
Yeah, well, fair enough. And as you grow, I think you realize that all those hard skills may complement things, but soft skills and what you're talking about, working hard and having commitment, is equally important. I think these days conversations don't end without using these two words, artificial intelligence. And given I'm speaking with you today, how do you see, because for any person thinking about it, I'm sure artificial intelligence would change how data collection, and if not data collection, more than that, just cleansing of data and data interpretation and everything changes. How do you see data collection and evaluation changing because of artificial intelligence?
I'll take a. So I think the dev sector, like I said, is I would peg the development sector on the late adopters side, Ayush. But I think I've tried out a few tools in the last couple of months, given the company I'm keeping. So some friends of mine who are experimenting themselves, and in fact, just 3 days ago, Google released its notebook LLM model, and you upload some information. You can give it documents, and you can ask it to look at websites, and you can ask it to generate a podcast. And I actually tried it out, and it's generated this 9-minute podcast of
Wow.
two. There's a man and a woman talking about Outline India, and it scraped the information of our website.
Wow.
It scraped the information of some of the reports that we've uploaded. It scraped the information of some of our social media handles. And it's a 9-minute podcast which perhaps describes so beautifully what we do as a
Yeah.
company, that when I listen to it, I'm like, oh my God, I should probably take notes and say this in my next chat, because
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to summarize it. And it's like they're having a conversation, and it's a very free flowing, disarming conversation that you can listen to going in a metro. So I thought that is quite stellar. The second thing is, again, I'm talking about real use cases. If you want to write a bid, applying for a bid or a proposal, earlier we would spend a lot of time just thinking through what are the questions or what are the key themes to attack, if these are my objectives. Now a lot of this can be generated using GPT, right? Again, some of your data cleaning codes, if you're using Python, etc., very simple answers. Stata not so much, but I think for Python, organizations using Python, I think they're increasingly using AI, etc.
Yeah.
And again, just earlier we would go looking for credible sources and numerous websites, and for different reasons, of course, as a data organization, we don't use Wikipedia. But I think just the fact that Chat GPT or Claude or whatever GPT you're using can make available information that you would typically take days to compile, collate, is such a win. I think even me, with my limited exposure to all of this, I don't think we fully fathom how this can change our lives. But I would like to believe that the use cases for the development sector will have a bigger impact than a lot of things we are seeing right now. I think once most of us begin to really start using it and understanding it, I want to believe that the positive externalities will be many.
Wow, yeah, that's crazy. And I think when I think of the last 20 years of our lives, from having the dabba phones to smartphones to this, it's crazy. It's crazy. I think this brings me to the segment I'm usually most excited about, which is the rapid fire segment. Now, it's not supposed to be too controversial, so don't worry. You may take your time, but yeah, we would like some fire.
Let's do that. Let's do that.
Yes. Yeah, I think I have these 7, 8 questions I'll throw at you. Let's see. And you may skip if you would like to
Sure.
skip a question. 1 year in your life you wish you could relive again.
1 year in my life, I've been for a bunch of music festivals, etc. If I could compile all of them in a 3-month time period, that'd be amazing.
Oh, wow. Which one is your favorite one?
I've done magnetic fields, I've done Tomorrowland, I've done Yacht Week. I would do all of these, and yeah, it's fun. It requires a lot of energy, and it's mad partying, and yeah, that's a side of me that's fun.
Wow, nice. Your role model in life or someone who has left a big mark on you?
That's a very tough one. I think I never like to idolize any one person. I have never idolized any one person, but of course, there's a mix of a lot of people I appreciate, whether it's good or startup founders, or it can be a Shah Rukh Khan, or it can be a sports person, but no one person. That's not me.
Fair enough. I think I can relate to that.
Yeah.
One thing your colleagues may not realize about you.
They hear me talk about me partying or me going absolutely crazy, because if I'm partying, I can start at 8 p.m. and end at 9 a.m. the next morning. But that's a side they've not been privy to. So just if I'm working, I like to really work. If I'm partying, I can really go crazy. 3 nights in a row, 9 hours, 10 hours each.
Wow, that's exciting. Your most exciting project until now, what and why?
Most exciting. I think I don't know if I want to call it exciting, because all our evaluations are difficult or interesting or heartbreaking for different reasons. When you're working with mothers or farmers or school teachers, etc., etc., they're all very different. But I think on a lot of different days, when we work with really young kids, 4 to 6-year-olds in rural areas, they're very innocent. And to get them to, when you have to ask them questions or study their attention spans, and to make a little child sit down, and at one level that, oh, they've come to a school with the hope that they'll learn something. And I think it makes you realize the privilege you yourself are coming from. You start asking a lot of questions about life, about why is it that somebody's born in privilege, and why is it that access looks so different for some person and so different for another. So I don't know about exciting, but yes, a lot of our field deployments stay with you and they make you think. And I think that is why, maybe because I've seen a very different side of life, or I see a very different side of life all the time, I want to believe that I can appreciate life a little bit better.
Fair enough. One of your favorite memories from Kiroli?
I'm forgetting his name, but who was that gentleman, Pintu or Chintu Bhaiya, who would move around with his thela? Tinku Bhaiya, who would move around and was selling chota chocolates and chiclets and all of that.
Yeah.
And I think he's seen generations of Kirorimal people.
He would come to our debating society parties.
Oh yeah, and he was, I think he was a fixture, right? Everybody loved him, everybody knew him, everybody respected him. And then of course, I think years ago, Kirorimal gave me this award, some notable alums. So that really meant something to me. I think it meant the world to me to receive it from KMC, from Delhi University. I think very close to my heart.
What's one quality that you really value the most in people working with you?
Perseverance. And I think it can be difficult to work with me sometimes. I feel like I have high expectations. And I think, again, as a young person, I was harsh. It's also possible that perhaps I said things I shouldn't have. It is possible that I was brash. And I should be apologizing for all of that. But there's no but I should be apologizing for that. But I think sometimes to do well, you've obviously, the learning curve can be steep, and you just have to stay at it. You have to believe that you'll get through those rough parts and then emerge victorious on the other side. So I think just being willing to put your head down and power through some of the tough days, perseverance is something I just do. It's up there for me.
On a scale of 1 to 10, if you were to rate yourself as a boss or a manager, How would you rate yourself?
Oh, I'm not answering this question. I think my colleagues will answer this, or I think a glass door will answer this. I can be tough, I want to believe. But again, I come from a family of my mother is a disciplinarian or used to be one. A kid of tough love. But of course, things are changing. And like my colleague says, Prerna, you have to reimagine the workplace. So I will let that rating be. I'm not answering this.
Good enough. That's why I had the skippable.
Yes, please. Pass.
Yes. What would you tell the Prerna from 2012? One advice or one happy news you'd like to give her? Or both?
One advice, I think, don't think too hard. I want to lots of weeks and days and nights where I couldn't sleep, or when it was tough at work. I was just very emotional. So at that point, I couldn't see what I now want to say. This too shall pass. It's very easy. It's very tough to see when you're in the throes of it and when you're a young person. So that's one thing I would tell Prerna, to just lighten up. This too shall pass. And what's the second thing?
Or one happy news you'd give her?
Oh, that you'll make it. You'll make it. And it's not done till it's done.
Yeah. Lovely. That was your rapid fire.
Oh, wonderful.
And lastly, any parting thoughts for us? And given that you talked so much about books, if there are books you'd like to recommend?
I think we all know that we should all learn and read. But I've also gone through phases and years and months when I didn't learn and didn't read enough, where I wasn't curious enough. And I think the company you keep really matters. So if you're with people who read and who want to learn, you'll in turn want to read and learn, right? So have very high standards for the company you keep. Have very high expectations from yourself. And lighten up. Have fun along the way. It's not done till it's done. But yes, be curious. Learn. Read. And say no's and value your time. And life is good. And lighten up. Life is good. That's it.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think I had a really great time speaking with you.
I hope this one's not too boring, Ayush. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I think it was lovely.